Hey, this is Tom, and welcome to the Value Investor by Tip Ranks. No intro music today. In fact, no music today in the video whatsoever. This is going to be a serious video. I want to explain what's going on the ground. I'm not on the ground in Kiev right now, but I have friends and family over there, and I am from Russia. So I feel I have a good understanding of the situation. And I want to explain to you what's going on here because this is getting serious. Now, again, there's a lot of misinformation going on in any case of conflict, military conflict, war, geopolitical tensions. There's a lot of, informational battles. We're not going in that direction at all. I just want to give you the actual factuals here. Basically, this is an article from Bloomberg you're seeing on the screen. Ukraine faces more brutal form of war as Russia regroups. And basically, this article, as you can see here on the screen, essentially showing you some of the destruction and the more aggressive form of war that Russia is currently carrying out in Ukraine. It began as these surgical strikes on military bases and, not populated centers. And now it seems to be widening to this more kind of overall all-out bombs. And the question is, why is this happening? Now, I'm going to pause the video here because, a lot of these images are disturbing, and I don't know if you want to watch this whole thing. But as you can see, there's a lot of destruction on the ground. So I'm just going to read a few lines from this article, then I'm going to explain to you what's going on here. So basically, according to this article, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is entering a new phase, promising a more deadly time ahead of the country's civilians and its remarkably determined army. I agree to that. Shout out to the Ukrainian army. They've been holding up like rocks. According to Western military officials, early signs that Russian commanders are abandoning the approach that marked the first days of the conflict, in which they relied on lightning strikes into cities they assumed would be half-heartedly defended, the officials said. So I want to explain to you in a second what's going on here. Basically, as you can see here, Russia started this war. They tried to surgically kind of attack just a little bit, not to hit population centers, not to hit infrastructure, just to basically scare the Ukrainian army away and topple the government and, easy peasy, and basically get the country to themselves. And obviously that didn't happen. And now they're going, much more into kind of a classic warfare scenario where we're seeing much more, shelling on populated centers. And the question is, why is this going on now? What's happening? So I'll explain in 2 minutes. You have to understand where this is all coming from. Now, Putin's actions and Russia's actions, as you can see by the reaction of the international community, are 100% unjustified. There's no recourse. There's no justification. There's absolutely nothing that can be said to justify what they're doing. Invading into a sovereign country that has done zero offensive attacks against you is illegal. International law clearly states that what Russia is doing here is not only illegal, it is in fact criminal. So that's probably why you're seeing this united front against Russia right now. Very few countries are coming out in support of Russia. I don't think outside of China, Syria, Iran. There's not a lot of people here that are supporting Russia. Even countries that are formerly known to be more neutral, I guess, like Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, coming out and basically supporting Ukraine. Most of these are actually, sending weaponry and actively supporting Ukraine. So just to start it off, absolutely illegal, absolutely criminal. Now, the question is, why did Russia do this? What was, the thinking behind this? So obviously this was a bully move, and as any bully, I think that it's important to understand what motivates Russia. And Russia is basically, there's something you need to understand. They run a very different ship than what you and I are kind of used to from the West. There's not a lot of debate in Russia going on. It's a one-man show. The government is a farce. All the officials is a farce. The consultants are all basically rubber stamps. It's a one-man show. And one man calls the shots, and that's pretty much how it works over there. You have to understand that it sounds like craziness to you in Western countries, but in Europe also, like most other countries, have these cultures that are, stemming from democracy, at least for the past 70, 80 years. Russia has been pretty much outside of about a decade between 1990 and 2000. Was always run by one strong man. That's what Russia always has and been. And unfortunately, after 1990, it reverted back into a dictatorship. So basically, that's important to clarify. It's specifically just Putin's decisions being carried out by a whole country. Now, Ukraine, again, sovereign country, westernized, liberal, and basically expressed certain desires to join NATO and the EU, as any other modern European country would want to, I guess. Nothing crazy about that. And then we saw this Russian invasion. So what just happened here and why it's getting worse? So Putin has been basically managing this conflict with Ukraine for about 8 years. So 8 years ago, in 2014, Putin decided to create this turmoil in Ukraine. And as this turmoil happened, it didn't go according to his plan. And the government that was initially put into place did not match what he think would be a convenient Russian-oriented, Russian-sympathetic government. They didn't get what they wanted. Now, through this whole mess of the 2014 craziness that happened in Ukraine, Ukraine was such a form of disarray, such a form of complete chaos that Russia just grabbed Crimea, which Putin needed for a whole bunch of reasons. That's a whole separate video. There's strategic reasons, there's demographic reasons, but he basically took Crimea and a bunch of Russian separatists who are somewhat or to an extent were backed by the Kremlin, grabbed 2 pieces of Ukraine in Lugansk and Donetsk. Mainly, this is a Russian-speaking, culturally Russian areas of Ukraine and eastern Ukraine, and that was the end of it. So that was in 2014. The world did not like it. The world did not appreciate it, but, it is what it is. Basically, since 2014, this has been a conflict area. That area is called the Donbas. I'm sure you heard this on the news. So the Donbas was a conflict area. And on both sides, you had people with guns, essentially Ukrainians on one side, Russian separatists on the other side. And occasionally they would shoot at each other or shell each other. But, it was not a peaceful border. Let's call it this way. And, there's a lot of claims that were basically from the Russian side that the Ukrainians have turned off the water flow to Crimea. And basically there's water conflicts over there. There's shelling on both sides, shooting on both sides, so nobody felt safe. And those 2 issues definitely were on Putin's mind for the past 8 years. However, I don't think they were dominant in his decision-making process. So as this actually carried on, this bothered him, but not enough to actually do anything about it. What I think Putin was more upset about is what happened in 2019. In 2019, Ukraine selected an even more Western-oriented government. They went even more west, and they selected a gentleman by the name of Vladimir Zelensky. Now, Vladimir Zelensky is a young, charismatic guy, and he was basically selected after playing, he was an actor and a comedian, and he played the role of the Ukrainian president in a TV show. They elected him, but, we shouldn't be throwing stones since we had Ronald Reagan, also an actor that became a president. So I know it is what it is. There's a lot of acting required, I guess, when you're president. So the skill set somewhat makes sense. In any case, the gentleman was elected in 2019, and he became as Western, U.S. oriented as one could imagine, and he started talking about joining NATO and the EU, and basically Putin did not appreciate it, did not like it. Now, is Ukraine within its prerogative to join the NATO and the EU? 100%. Does them joining threaten Putin? Yes. Does it give him a right, an excuse to invade Ukraine? 100% no. So basically what happened is that Putin has basically a goal ever since Zelensky came to power is to stop this development from happening. Now, as you can see on the map, NATO has been expanding since the late 90s all the way until now quite significantly. We pretty much have Belarus and Ukraine separating Russia and NATO. And Belarus, though, for all intents and purposes, for the past 2 years is just Russia. Just let's talk about Belarus as Russia for the past 2 years. There's certain things that happened over there that, Lukashenko essentially became a province of Russia. And Lukashenko is the president of Belarus. So Ukraine is, facing towards NATO and talking about NATO. Putin doesn't like it. So he has 2 options here. He has 4 problems to solve and 2 options to solve them. The 4 problems are water supply to Crimea, from Ukraine, stop the tensions and violence on the Donbas border between the separatists and the Ukrainian forces, topple the Zelensky government so he doesn't have a Western-facing anti-Russia government in Ukraine, and make sure NATO signs an agreement to never let Ukraine in, for Ukraine to be always neutral as a kind of a buffer zone between Russia and NATO. He had these four goals, and his options were carry on fueling these tensions in the Donbas area, creating more tensions between the separatists in Lugansk and Donetsk and Ukraine, or take the whole goddamn country, right? And for 8 years, he chose the first option because it made a lot of sense. Essentially, the first option was, hey, we're going to create these tensions here, and we're going to put pressure on Ukraine, because Ukraine, by definition, where they're in a state of conflict and a state of war in the Donbas, it's a destabilizing factor. And in fact, Zelensky's government was not very popular before they went into war with Russia. Zelensky had a popularity problem, and I don't know if he would have or would not have gotten elected again, but he was definitely not the most popular, iconic character that is today. This war definitely created this whole ethos around him. For better or worse, I like the guy, but I mean, certain people don't. It is what it is. He wasn't a popular president. And basically, Putin was getting his way. Essentially, the European community was basically saying, hey, he can keep those separatist area because we need Russian gas. And, Russian natural gas is like 60% of the entire supply of Germany and 40% for the entire continent. So with keeping these tensions alive, essentially Putin was killing two stones with one bird. He essentially created a conflict of interest between the US and the EU, which means an internal conflict inside NATO. What to do about Russia? Europeans were pressuring not to go too hard in Russia because of their obvious interest with Russian energy. And the US obviously wants more domination and more control of the area, so they obviously want to go harder on Russia. And this was working for them. And Zelensky wasn't popular. And Ukraine joining NATO was not, it doesn't seem like it was in the cards, at least not for a decade. But I think that at some point, Putin decides, well, this is not happening as fast as I want it to happen. I want Zelensky gone right now. I want assurances of no NATO ever for Ukraine. I want this whole mess with Donetsk and Lugansk finished. Let's just call it Russian territory or whatever they want to call it. And I want to, control Ukraine enough to, restart water flow to Crimea and just finish this whole thing, this whole Western nonsense. You have to understand that for Putin, having also Ukraine on his backyard, showing everybody in Russia how a Western Slavic country can actually prosper is not a good idea. Basically, he decides to say, well, I can't wait. I'm going in right now. And his calculation was very simple. He basically was saying, well, I'll take Ukraine and America will punish me for this and sanction me for this, but the Europeans will never do it. They need me too much. I'm too important for the European Union. I just have too many cards. They need my gas. I mean, and look at it this way. There's a reason why he did this at the winter time, because at winter time the gas actually means a lot more for Europe. Essentially, you'll have people freezing in Europe without Russian gas. It's that bad. So, especially with Germany phasing out nuclear energy and coal energy, Germany became very dependent. So basically, Putin made a calculated risk to go into Ukraine. He got impatient with his slow-burning plan and said, I want to microwave this thing. I don't want to wait until the oven in 2 hours it's going to be ready. I want to microwave it right now. And much like when you microwave food, when you microwave a geopolitical master plan, it usually comes out like microwave food. It didn't happen like he wanted to. Essentially, what happened is that he pushed too hard. I think he didn't understand cancel culture in 2022, because essentially he got canceled, including Germany, who absolutely needs his gas. Basically came out and said, hey, we're not going to stand for this. Even though we need your gas, this is going too far. So what happened is that he got sanctioned not only by the US, which he was preparing for, and de-dollarizing his entire exports and going into euros, because they didn't think that the euro will be sanctioning him, But essentially, everybody, including the European Union, decided to sanction him, including closing off the Russian central bank out of access to foreign capital, essentially cutting off his supply to his war chest for the most part. And that's a very painful thing to have. I don't think Putin realized how unilateral, how unified, and how galvanizing his invasion going to be as far as the European Union, NATO, and the US. Everybody is now against him. In fact, it's gotten so bad in Russia. Economists are saying that this ruble crisis right now, for the past 4 days, the ruble inflated by anywhere from 30 to 60%. There's certain people even saying 70% inflation in a single 4 days. That's what happens when you cut off an economy from worldwide markets. So the central bank is blocked. A lot of banks are blocked from SWIFT. Massive sanctions. It's gotten this bad. The Russian stock exchange is basically closed for the past 2 days. It's closed Monday. It was closed today, and probably will be closed tomorrow, because the moment they open that up, the entire markets are gonna. No circuit breaker is gonna be off. I mean, it's gonna be a complete pandemonium. Russia has been passing laws that foreigners can't sell outside of Russia. There's a whole different discussion here of how these sanctions are going right now. But basically, the pain that Russia is feeling economically from the sanctions is much worse than Putin initially thought about, because Europeans are going all in on basically punishing him. And I don't think he accounted for this. Now, at this point, he has two options. Now we're getting to the point of why it's getting more brutal here. And I'm sorry for rambling on. Let me know in the comments if you hate it or like it. I'm just, sharing my opinion here. This is not a usual video. I just feel like talking about this stuff, and I feel like you guys are hanging out here with me in my living room. So he has two options now, how to solve this problem. So the war is costing him $20 billion a day. He has about $140 billion left out of his war chest, because out of the $640 billion, most of it got blocked by the sanctions. So he only has the gold. He has gold reserves of about $130 billion. So he's pretty much running on fumes right now. 4 days into it, he spent already $80 billion out of the $140 billion he has in the war chest. In Russia right now, it's total hell. No ATMs, barely working. You can get max like $50, $60 a day from the ATM. You can only pay cash. Apple Pay doesn't work. Credit cards doesn't work. BP is getting out of Russia. Exxon, I think, is getting out. So it's just basically a complete clusterfuck. Now, basically, so he has two choices. He can either go to China and say, hey, China, I need money. So why don't you buy all this produce for me that the Europeans are now not buying? Energy, wheat, commodities, coal. Just start buying from me stuff and pay me in your currency, and then I'll have cash, and it will be sanction free. But that in itself is not going to be easy. Logistically, Russia has a problem right now with moving so much energy and goods into China. They don't have the infrastructure as far as pipelines, and supply chains are now a total mess with the sanctions. Plus, I don't know if China wants to get involved with Putin right now, because it almost getting to a point where Putin is too radioactive even for China. But here's the thing. This option is no good anyways for Putin, because even if he works some deal out with China, basically China becomes so influential over him, because they're going to be responsible for his survival. They're going to own him, and Russia will become a puppet government of China, which is obviously Putin cannot have that happen. That's his entire existence, his entire legacy is ending up as a puppet of China is not acceptable. So his only second option is to topple the Ukrainian government as fast as he can. He's been trying to take Ukraine surgically, right, so far. Basically, not go for the population centers, just go for the military slightly, just scare enough the army to run away, scare enough the government to run away, and install a puppet government and leave Ukraine, keep it going the way it is. He doesn't want to control Ukraine. He doesn't want to be there in a 30 to 40 million people country. Guerrilla warfare against you, massive problems, feed the people, keep the lights on. He doesn't want that. So, however, his plan didn't work. So now he has to expedite. So that means he has to be much more brutal. He needs to end this war as soon as possible and basically go forward. Every day that this goes by, it's costing him money, and he's basically losing friends. He pretty much is down to just the 2 or 3 friends, no money. So this more brutality you're seeing out of Russia is just basically putting pressed against his wall. He tried a few nuclear threats. That didn't work. Nobody really took that serious. And now he's trying to be more aggressive to scare the military even more, maybe create some sort of an internal coup against the government, basically get the people to overthrow the government because now they're more scared. I don't know. But it is what it is. He's trying to expedite, obviously, by leveling certain government buildings, and it's not full on like complete indiscriminate bombing of population centers, which I think he's not far from doing, but God forbid that we ever get to that. But it's definitely getting worse because he's in a tighter spot. He's getting more pressured right now into delivering results, which he failed so far. And I think that we're headed to some really dark days over there. So my prayers and hopes and best wishes to anybody in that region. I love you all. I pray for the safety of you and the safety of Ukraine. I hope this ends soon with as little possible as casualties. Let me know below what you think about this video, if you enjoyed this sort of video or not. I'm just trying to give you kind of an insider perspective of what's going on from a Russian. I hope this was helpful. Let me know. I'll see you in a couple of days, hopefully.